γλυκή μου γλυκύτατον τέκνον που έδισου το ο φως των οφθαλμών γλυκύτατον πως τα φωνήν καλύπτει.
We're going to be talking about a period of time that was a few years after the end of World War II, continuing on into probably the more turbulent years of the United States in the late 1960s going up to 1969. By way of perspective, World War II was over. The Cold War had begun. Korea was now a conflict. It was called a war as well. Vietnam was starting to build up. It was a more stable period of time in our country. But it was also a time of change. We're going to look at this week's panel and talk about what life was like at Saint Spyridon in Roseland. We'll talk about the social life, parish life, and any other remembrances that they have. First, we'll introduce our panel. Turning now, we have Mr. James Stive, George Kerbakis, Jim Anagnostopoulos, Rose Ayalianos, Mr. Nick Benitatos, Eleni Bazoukas, James Halikas, Angelo Meklis, Stella Parhas, Pat Katsinas, Ted Georgopoulos, John Kaziokos, and Maria Matanis. I'd like everyone to go back and think about life in the 1950s. Think about what it was like at Saint Spyridon back then. We'll begin. What was it like getting back and forth to church then? How did you actually get to church? Mr. Anagnostopoulos.
Well, a lot of people the families drove the cars together. Otherwise, they probably took the streetcars that came down Michigan Avenue, and we could stop at different, like 113th or 115th, and then walk, down to South Park. And
we lived behind the church's property.
So literally right behind Saint Spyridon. Anyone else lived near the church? Mr. Halikas.
I lived 3 blocks away. I was at 110th and South Park, and the church was 113th.
Anyone else? Mr.
I
Benitatos.
lived 2 blocks out, two houses away. Was the church on a corner, was a house right next to. I stayed there for 4 or 5 years.
I lived at 113th in Indiana. I was about 2 or 3 blocks away from the church. And I always used to go down the alley and I'd get right in front of the church in South Park.
I have 2 children. I got married in the Saint Spyridon church. I baptized the kids. And we stayed there for a while.
I've been a member of the church since 1958. And I'm a board member since 1966 till now. I was living that time close to the Saint Spyridon. It's about 113 and Forest Park.
In terms of getting to know each other, socializing, and getting married, how did people meet in the 1950s, that whole decade?
Met if they went to the church and then joined the Goya. I met Jim Stives in the church in the Goya. And they always had a picnic too, you know, festival like we have.
And the Greek dance too.
They had certain dances at the church in the
The choir for 10 years. 10 years ago, Jimmy was the president.
Met the wife in church, and some friend of us they introduced. We got married there.
I tell you something, I met my wife at Chris and Alexandra Cole George's wedding. And it was love at first sight. But like they say in Greek, όταν είδε τη γυναίκα μου, μου γυάλισε τα μάτια.
Saint Spyridon. They were along the St. Constantine Church from Harvey, because the bishop, the priest of St. Constantine, he elevated to a bishop, Tripodakis. And so all the Cretans belonged to St. Constantine. Well, after he was elevated to a bishop in San Francisco, most of the Greeks from Cretans went back to their own churches. I met my wife coming back to Saint Spyridon, and I met her, and after we were together for a while, we got engaged, and we got married in 1960.
We lived in my yaya's building on 113th and Langley with my mom and my other two sisters. And we always spoke Greek to my yaya, but my mom spoke English all the time. But when my yaya was there, it was in Greek. And when company would come, we had to speak Greek. And we also had to learn Greek songs so we could entertain the company.
We spoke English in the house, but my mom and dad spoke Greek to each other, but they spoke English to me. But my dad wanted English in the house because he wanted to talk English better, we wanted to learn the language better. Because in order to get ahead in life in the United States and to make money, we had to know the language.
Because I spoke both Greek and English at home. My mother was born here in the United States, and my dad came here at 13. But when I attended Pullman School, many times if there were Greek kids in the school and didn't know English, I would have to help them. Rose's nieces came from Greece, Diane and Joanne, and they couldn't understand certain things, and the principal would bring me over to talk to them, to explain to them. But then they did catch on quick after that. I mean, they learned quickly. But in the beginning, when they came from Greece, I'd have to help translate for some of the kids.
Greek school, was that part of life, as you recall it, in the 1950s?
Yes.
But getting
Go ahead, Mr. Holly.
in school, I remember when I was taken to the Pullman school like she was, I was baptized Dimitrios. And the school at that time, the American school, would not allow that name to be used in the roster of names. They had to come up with another name for Dimitrios. That's how I landed up with James, because I was not baptized James. I was baptized Dimitrios, but they wouldn't allow that name. It was really, really tricky on it, to what the names were to be used in the public schools at that time. So they had to change it to James, or use a name, like Jimmy, James, whatever, they put James to get into the school. Otherwise, they wouldn't let you go to school unless you had the proper name, English name for my name.
I remember in grammar school, we still went by my long name, Anagnostopoulos, but then we used Agnes for short because it was so hard for them to say it. And when it come time for graduation, they said my name the long way, and everybody was looking, who's that? And they explained it, Jim, but they used Agnes for short.
Let's look at life at the parish. Besides attending church on Sundays, what activities were there? Was there a choir? altar boys. We've already talked about Greek school. Sunday school, anyone care to comment on any of that?
Well, I was an altar boy, so it was very obviously in those days that the priests were extremely strict. So when you were an altar boy, you had you followed a very, very stringent line in there. No talking, no nothing, and the priest would say, El Ador, you go there, El Ador, Piador, you were very, very, very well behaved in those days. Both in Greek school, with the Greek school teachers.
Family with my cousins, was 2 girls and a boy. We went to church every Sunday. And I was enjoying the choir with my cousin.
How big was the choir then? How many?
We were about 12, 14 people for kids.
Men, women, young?
No, just the girls.
Just the girls?
Yeah. And then we joined Goya, and Jimmy was the president.
Anyone else remember being in the choir? Pat?
Not in the 50s, but in the
She was the young.
62.
Okay, so
62 on, and I'm still there.
and you're a
53 years.
you're a current choir member. How big was the choir back in the 60s?
About the same, about 15, yeah.
All women?
All women. I know in the earlier days, in the 30s, choir goes back, there were men in the choir back then.
Other activities besides altar boys, choir, and Greek school?
Junior Goya, senior Goya.
What did Goya do during the 50s and 60s?
We would have dances, we would have like retreats, but they didn't call them retreats then, during the holidays and things like that.
Sometimes they'd have some plays at the church, and then they'd have different, we used to have some dances down in the church basement there, and then we used to go sometimes to like the beach, or we go to they had Riverview. We used to go on different, then of course they always had a picnic every
You
year.
talked about plays. Now, were the plays performed by individuals from the parish or from outside
No, these
theatrical
were from
troupes?
people from the church parish, right on, they had a stage on the stage there.
Were those in English or in Greek?
I think they were probably mostly English ones.
Mostly English.
Yeah, mostly English.
Really?
All right, let's talk about the language back then. Oh, Jimmy?
The one thing that we haven't mentioned was there was also parishioners that helped out in teaching the children to dance. There was a Mr. Mandakas in the 30s that taught the girls how to dance and actually took them to the Trinidad Ballroom for a public show of Cretan dances. And then I believe in the 40s and 50s was Mrs. Stavrakis' mother. They used to teach them at their fruit store. I can't remember.
Lazarus,
yeah, Mrs. Lazarus. She used to teach the kids in the store. After they would close the store, they would.
You made sure it was very strict. Greek school was very strict.
Yes.
Extremely strict.
Oh, yes.
Everybody's house and put us in that bus and he'd take us to Greek school, and we would just torture them. I mean, the things that.
But you tortured who?
I mean, I remember I was little, obviously, but I'll never forget. Stop at the stop sign. Some of the boys opened the back door and they jumped out of there. And people were going and stopped the van. He's running after them. and he used to sing on the bus. That's what I remember.
Yes,
But he used to.
Well, there was also the problem, there was a little Volkswagen bus. And they jammed about 35, 40 people in this thing. And we were stuffed in there like sausages, and that's no baloney. To barely close the door. I was one time there at the door, and he closed the door real good. The door flies open, I go rolling on the pavement, 30 miles an hour, I'm all scratched up, you're okay. Throw me back in the bus, pop me to Greek school. And I go home and they go, hey, man, we fell out of the bus. Yeah, right.
May I ask, Jimmy, do you remember when the bus broke down and you kids had to push it?
Pushed it all the way to the church.
Excuse me, how would you describe your memories?
But you know what? The Greek school, the Greek people were very, very strict. The old days were you respected your elders, you didn't say boo to the Vascalo, you were nothing but a bevy, and you were nothing, your stoma was closed.
Right.
You didn't say nothing. You respected your elders no matter what happened. You know what I mean? And if you didn't, you know, you paid the price.
I agree with him, but, you know, I got whacked quite a few times with that big long ruler for talking too much.
You move your hand.
Mr. McLeese?
Yeah, you know, in Greek school, every so often, at least once a week, the δάσκαλο would say, παιδιά, ανοίξτε τα χέρια σας. So we opened it.
Yes.
Και άμα είχαμε dirty hands, ερχόταν με τη δέκα. Wham! They didn't care if you were a boy or a girl. You'd get it right in the hand. Και μάθαμε να κλείνουμε τα χέρια μας.
Just one question for the board from today. The statute of limitations has run out on it, right?
No one's going to get in trouble. Pat?
We have to give credit to Mr. Fotopoulos because I've only gone 2 years to Greek school then, and he was in one room with all of us kids, so the first 2 lines were one grade, then the next, so he did your mathema, he went on to the next, so you better be studying what he taught you, you know, otherwise you got the ruler, and then just go on. But he did teach all the kids in one room.
Awesome.
You know.
Mr. Fotopoulos took very big pride in providing good programs. End of the year and March 25th programs. I remember he had us, I mean, we would be practicing those plays and the acting. He wanted it perfect. That I remember.
I thought it was fun myself.
Maria? You enjoyed it?
It was okay.
John, tell us, what were your thoughts?
The problem was, church was teaching me Greek, but at home, English was spoken. And no Greek was, very little Greek was spoken at home. But at Greek school, I had, especially during the recess.
Were there any other social activities, social organizations that you remember growing up? AHEPA, daughters, maids, sons, Goya.
There was social, but there also was a PTA at the old church.
Yeah, there was.
Yes.
And I remember only going to the meetings because my mother would go after church on Sunday, and Mary Wagner was president then. I don't know who some of the other presidents were, but I do remember we had a PTA and it was active.
What were the responsibilities of the PTA?
They sort of was geared to the women that were involved with children in the school, both Greek school and Sunday school.
So what type of activities do you remember the PTA
They would
performing?
maybe provide things for the Greek school. If we, you know, maybe they'd do the refreshments when we'd have exitasis or March 25th. They'd do either if we had food or some sort of snacks. And other things maybe for Sunday school.
New Year's Eve dances, they always sponsored those.
Mr. Geropoulos.
I remember during the 60s, I was teaching my kids English and they teach me Greek.
Wait,
And we put a basket out there, I remember, and we were dancing Greek, and they're all throwing money in the basket.
We're talking about the 1950s and 60s. How about athletics? Did Saint Spyridon have any team sports? Basketball, baseball? Mr. Anastopoulos?
Yes, they had a baseball team that I played on, and they had a basketball team. We played, different Greek churches. And we played at Grant Park downtown, the baseball games usually.
That was Goya.
Goya.
I was in the Goya, I was president twice, and we had basketball tournaments, baseball,
Right.
all the sports. We'd have dances a couple times a year. We'd have a mass attendance. I don't know if you ever heard of that, where once a year you have everyone come to church, if you're a church, from all the other churches, and have a free luncheon.
We used to have a parade. We had a parade, one time down in South Park then.
Yeah.
They had a float with the church.
We had a big, very large group of Goyans. Rose was part of it, the Goya.
Yeah.
And many young kids from Greece would come in.
A lot of kids from
They came
Greece.
into it.
And my brother.
And also the American ones, and so we had very, very active groups.
Was a lot of Greek kids.
And very nice. They're everything very respectable. Everything was,
Yeah, when we had the dances, a lot of the young men that came from Greece, they were real good. They do these fancy dances, flipping and all.
In church. Let's talk first about the service. The liturgy, was that in Greek or in English?
Greek.
100% Greek.
100% Greek.
100%, no English at all.
At what point do you remember any English involved in the liturgy?
God, that's
I think
when
in
the
the
church came here.
70s.
When the church came here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Roseland was always Greek. There was no English at all during the sermons at all.
At the various activities, were those in Greek or English? What was spoken? The dinner dances, festivals, things like that, where someone would have to speak.
Well, there was English too, mostly.
English, probably, yeah.
So that would be Greek and English. How about the board meetings? Those of you that were on the board then, that were on the Συμβούλιο, Μιλάγετε ελληνικά ή αγγλικά? Was the church board meeting in Greek or in English? Back at Saint Spyridon in Roseland. Mr. Georgopoulos?
That time, όλα τα meetings γινόσαν στα ελληνικά.
English.
So everything was in Greek then?
Greek,
Μόνο μιλάγατε ελληνικά τότε?
Yeah, beginning, then transferred to the halfway. Half English, half... Αλλά τα πρακτικά εγγραφώσατε σε English.
Philoptochos.
Oh, yeah.
What was Philoptochos like then?
In Saint Spyridon at the old time,
At
all my
Roseland.
aunts used to be the Philoptochos. Η θεία μου ήταν στο Philoptochos. We were in a choir in Agoya, so, but she used to be a president of the Philoptochos.
What does Philoptochos do now?
Now, we do a lot of things right now. We help a lot of poor people, we help the church, and we do a lot of things over
The
here.
word Philoptochos comes from the Greek, friend of the poor.
I think you're the good.
And that's what Philoptochos does, isn't that right?
Help the poor.
Βοηθάνε τους φτωχούς.
Yeah, we help the poor a lot.
Και βοηθάνε αυτούς που έχουν ανάγκη. Those that are in need, is that correct?
Yeah, we do a lot of work, and like last every day, I work in San Canis, making blankets and everything for the poor people.
Mr. Stive?
If you off the horse during that time, it's always having bake sales to raise money for the church. They raise a lot of money, and when we were going to put up the church, we raided, if you left the host treasury, about $50,000, and put the flooring in here. The terrazza came to the Philoptochos. All the money, cash came to the Philoptochos.
At the old church, there was an active Philoptochos. Mrs. Petrakis, Mrs. Varelis, they were presidents. Mrs. Guvis. It was the ladies that sort of were, the PTA women were a younger group. And then the other women were Philoptochos, some of the older ladies. Andrea, you may know anything about Philoptochos?
Anything you'd like to add?
My mother was Philoptochos president. Back then, there were only 2 or 3 people that would keep changing terms because no one wanted to take it. So it was my mother, Chris Petrakis, it was Mrs. Patritzes, it was Olga Varela's, Jane Charles, I believe, was the president one time, Mrs. Gubis. I don't remember anybody else.
Mrs. Varales was called the mother of the church.
I'm sorry?
Mrs. Varales was called the mother of the church.
Yes, she was.
The 1960s were a time of turmoil, almost like a troubled teenager. Civil rights movement, the Vietnam War. It had its impact throughout the country. And we saw transitions. We saw movement. We saw a change in neighborhoods. We saw violence and demonstrations on the street. In the late 1960s, Saint Spyridon and Roseland had somehow decided that it was time to move. We're going to talk about that now. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now the late 1960s. At least that's what some of you have said. There was a decision to move from Saint Spyridon and Roseland somewhere else. How did that come to pass? What triggered the thought, the conversation, the discussion back then?
Jeremy, if I go first.
Mr. Georgopoulos, please.
Yes, in 1968, the neighborhood of Roseland, it changed rapidly because too many marbles coming up. We have to move because we have the kids and we don't want it to get mixed up and we have to get the place dangerous.
Was it a safety issue?
Yes, safety and mostly safety.
So what happened?
So that we had, I was in a board meeting that time with the other people, and we discussed what to get to where to go. So we have about three places that time. Mr. Mitchell, he says that time 95th and Ridgeland somewhere. Mr. Carabelas, he says 143 west of Harlem. It's another property. And Alec Pappas, he says this place. And we figure that time, the board, out in Orland, that time wasn't nothing, wasn't developed or something. They said, what to go there, which nothing. It's better to go over here, we're gonna be closer to the people around. And we decide to buy that property. And we have the money, but we think to sell the church and buy the property. So that we vote yes, and we, 69 I believe, we bought the property. And we start moving slowly. In 1971 it was, 75 we...
Let me give you a perspective from the minutes of the past history. Mid-60s, St. Nicholas had left gone to Oakland, and St. Spyridon lost a lot of parishioners because of the area. People convinced other people to move to St. Nicholas because it was a safer neighborhood.
Yeah.
They had a school, they had everything. At the time when they first moved there, the intention was that the three churches, St. Nicholas, St. Constantine and Helen, and St. Spyridon, were going to build there together. It was going to be three churches, three names, and they were going to build a high school.
For the same period of time we're talking about, the 50s and 60s, what was the relationship like with the clergy? How did the board and the parishioners get along with the priest? And do you remember how many priests there were during this 2-decade period?
With Father Thalashino, I think there was a respect with Father Thalashino. The board, the community respected him.
I think we've covered all the topics, at least for today. Mr. Georgopoulos, anything else you'd like to add?
Ο Φάδες Θαλασσινός είναι αυτός που έδωσε πολλά για τον Ασπυρίδωνα. ήταν από το 1966 until after we built the church, 1987. He's the one we went all the islands to get pictures από εκκλησίες. Δηλαδή ποια είναι καλή, ποια δεν είναι καλή, ποια αυτό, και τα έφερνε στο meeting και έλεγε I like this from that church, I like that from that church. So we make on all the churches we picked up, το Συμβούλιο picked up a little bit from one, a little bit from the other για να κάνουμε το σχέδιο για αυτή την εκκλησία. Και βοήθησε πάρα πολύ ο Φάδερ Θαλασσινός για την εκκλησία αυτή.
Probably the best way to put it, he was probably the biggest pillar of strength for Saint Spyridon during trying times. That's probably the best way to put it.
He wanted the church to go up.
That's right. He fought, he worked the nail. You know, the man was an exceptional teacher of theology and at the colleges, you know what I mean? He was a very smart man.
We could easily
and a very good man, you know what I mean?
We would actually spend an entire session talking about the priests in terms of our perspective here at Saint Spyridon. I'd like to conclude now, and if each of you could make one brief comment about a memorable part of this period of time of the, I'd say going from 1950 to 1969, anything that stands out, anything that is most memorable, anything that you would want to impart to someone who would be asking you this question 50 years from now. Mr. Stive, what would you like to say that you haven't already told us?
Well, the only thing I could say is that people were very close in Roseland. The church, Saint Spyridon, was a very warm community, and I think people wanted to stay part of Saint Spyridon, even though things were happening. And many people, after everything happened, came back to Saint Spyridon. So, people friendly.
Mr. Anastopoulos.
I agree with that totally. There was just so many family and business in Roseland here, and members of the church, and we always had a good time, good relation. Everybody got along, and just so many different things that we did together, and just enjoyed it.
Τώρα που είμαι εδώ είναι πολύ ωραίο, σαν οικογένεια είμαστε, just like a family.
A lot of people, when the neighborhood changed, they moved out. So a lot of them, they came back. A lot of them, like I am, I went to St. Nicholas. So I came back here, and my daughters got married here, baptized the kids here. So we did here, and we like the church. We try to serve it as much as we can and help.
I would just like to say the church back then, it was sort of the center of our lives. I mean, everything we did with our families, all the friends here that are lifetime friends, it was all part of our life. The church was the center of our life. I mean, like for activity-wise and that, for the family, the community, maintaining your Greek identity, your Greek faith.
Dimitrios.
Well, I gotta say one thing. In Roseland, Saint Spyridon was actually liked by all of Roseland. And the way I saw that was that we used to have the Greek picnic in the little parking lot and close the street off. People from all of Roseland, Pullman, Kensington, they all look forward to our Greek picnic. And you see people from every ethnic background, different religions. They all seem to like Saint Spyridon. And they always, it would just seem like that picnic was a lot of fun for everybody. So it was funny because, obviously everybody had their ethnic backgrounds and they only stayed with their ethnic background. But for some reason, all the ethnic backgrounds always loved coming to Saint Spyridon's Festival in Roseland. I remember that from all faiths and backgrounds,
Turning to our next Jim, Mr. President.
That St. Spyridon is like a family. We may not agree on everything, we may argue and fight, but when it comes to critical decisions and critical times, we're here as a family and we work together and get through it. And that's why the church is here today and so successful.
Ms. Parhas.
The only thing I can say is, no matter what, if you look from Saint Spyridon before, for some reason Saint Spyridon has a way of attracting people back. come back.
Ms. Katsinas?
I agree with most everyone. Through thick and thin, we've always been here for each other as a family. Even like if someone's ill or something, everyone cares about you. And I never had an urge to go to another church. Saint Spyridon is my home.
Mr. Georgopoulos?
Ο Άγιος Σπυρίδωνας είναι το σπίτι μας. Δοκιμάσαμε να το κρατήσουμε και να το προχωρήσουμε παραπάνω από ό,τι ήταν. Να το φέρουμε σε καλύτερο position, σε καλύτερο κόσμο, σε καλύτερο environment. Λοιπόν, αυτό θέλω για τα next generation to try to do the same.
Thank you. Mr. Koziokas?
What I like about it is seeing so many old people talk about the history, and my memory is during Easter, we used to go outside and march for Good Friday down 100, down South Park to 112th to Indiana, was it Indiana?
Right.
And
You
then
go down Indiana down to 15th Street and come back around.
come back around.
Good Friday.
Good Friday.
Yeah.
Their festivals closed the half a street, block it off. My mom used to help out in the kitchen for different for Easter or whatever, but it was a fun time being a little kid at Saint Spyridon. I didn't know everything that was going on, but it was fun.
John, thank you. Ms. Britannis?
I can just say I have to agree with everybody here. I would say happy memories and good friendships that you built and families that know each other really well. I can't add anything more. Everybody said it.
I'd like to thank the entire panel. I'd like to thank the entire panel for taking time today and talking about what were the changing years in the 1950s and 1960s. We're going to continue on with our next panel. Thank you.